Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today we're bringing you a rare archival talk from Anaïs Nin, recorded at Esalen in 1972, in which she speaks about the craft of writing. But as with so much of Nin's work, what unfolds is less of a lecture, more of a lyrical meditation on creativity and identity and the courage to feel deeply. So a little bit about Nin. She was born in France to Cuban parents, and she wrote obsessively, really from the age of 11 until her death. She produced 16 volumes of diaries alongside novels, essays, and some of really the most influential erotic literature of the 20th century. Some of her books are Delta of Venus and Little Birds. She's very well known for her legendary entangled love affairs, including one with a writer who is of great proximity to Esalen and lived in Big Sur for many years, Henry Miller. Their relationship was intellectual, it was sexual, it was creatively catalytic. At one point, Nin was also deeply entangled with Miller's wife, June, writing I Have Become June. For a time, she maintained 2 simultaneous marriages, one on each coast of the U.S., a juggling act that she called her bicoastal trapeze, complete with multiple checkbooks and a, quote, lie box to keep her stories straight. And through it all, she wrote. Nin had a long-standing relationship with Big Sur and Esalen's creative community. She once described the coast as a curving hand cupped around a secret. Nin herself was that secret. She was a writer far ahead of her time, exploring the feminine interior with a kind of boldness, a sensuality, and truly a poetic fire. Settle in. Let Anaïs Nin's voice carry you somewhere timeless.
Tonight I was asked to talk about writing, but not talking about writing as literature, but as intimately connected with our life. I would even say as necessary to our life. Many women today who are starting to create find themselves bound by tradition, by voodoos, by all kinds of impediments. These impediments I discovered very early, and I resorted to a secret underground method of accomplishing my aim in writing, which was to write a secret diary. And I want to say how important this was, because even in the year 900, a Japanese woman wrote the first diary. And it seems to have been something that women turned to for 2 reasons. One was the necessary secrecy, which made it difficult in whatever culture, even in the year 900 in Japan, to speak up. And I say that women were veiled much longer than we believe, just as much as the Oriental woman. That is, she veiled part of her thinking from herself, and she certainly veiled it from others. It was far more difficult for a woman to expose her thoughts and her feelings because of the certain cultural veil imposed on her, certain role which she accepted, certain values which she felt were threatened perhaps by the creative willfulness or the creative will. Now I want to tell you from the very beginning how this writing happened to be, to show you the link with life and how it was a necessary part of living. When I was 9 years old, a doctor made an erroneous diagnosis and said I would never walk again. And my first reaction then was to ask for pencil and paper and to start making portraits of the members of my family. Then this continued in the form of notes, which I gathered today. I gathered in a little notebook and even wrote on it, member of the French Academy. So there was quite obviously there a turning to a way of life, because I thought I was going to be deprived of the normal activities of a child or an adolescent. I'm trying to use this as a metaphor because the writing became not only when I was able again to walk, and there was no question of that impediment, the writing remained a source of contact with myself and with others. And at this time, when we live in such an accelerated life where we think that contacts are very transient and passing and superficial, then we have to examine the fears we had of revealing ourselves. Part of this fear took its expression in the novel. We thought then things could be expressed in the novel. Nevertheless, women continued to write diaries, and we know that Georgia Sand, even though she produced so many novels, felt it necessary to tell herself about her own life. The secrecy that I kept for so many years, until the time I decided to share the diaries with you, revealed something to me that I think applies to all of us. It revealed the fear we have of exposing our deepest self. And it is this fear which has played almost a major role in what we call the alienated society. I don't think there were the external reasons of transience of American life, the fact that we move about, the fact that we're easily uprooted. Even the fact that I was uprooted is exactly what made me turn once more to writing, because when I came to America I couldn't speak the language and therefore had no friends, and the diary became the friend and the father confessor or whatever. It played all kinds of roles. It was also a substitute for the absent father. But you see, I learned the vital quality of this, what seemed to be a monologue, an interior monologue. But it wasn't only that. It was the way I was going to rebuild the bridge that was broken by the separation of the parents and by the uprooting to a foreign country. So the writing began to have all kinds of living, vital meaning, which had nothing to do with literature, absolutely nothing to do with literature. It became a source of not only contact with myself, so that I wouldn't be lost in a foreign country whose language I couldn't speak. It was a companion. It was also a place where I could tell the truth and where I felt that nobody would look into it. Even today, when some young psychoanalysts being trained by Dr. Howard Stone in Los Angeles were assigned to write a diary, they sent for me very quickly because of the fears which assailed them. They were not afraid to talk about anything relating to human character or human experience. Nothing frightened them at all, as long as they could talk about it in groups and with each other. But when they found themselves alone in a room in front of a white notebook, they were frightened. And we had to talk about this fear. And this fear I've known very well. It's the fear of the eye that looks over our shoulder. It could be from the first eye that looks over our shoulder. It could be the parent. It can be the teacher. It can be the doctor. It can be anyone who watches our life. And as a child, we are watched. It can even be what religion keeps telling us, which I often thought was a very frightening idea, that God sees everything we do. I'm speaking purposely of the impediments that cultures and religion and the role of women have placed in the way of expression. And I'm trying to say that this articulateness and this expression are terribly, vitally necessary to our life. They're necessary to our relationships. And even though I started as a child, and this you may not believe, as a mute child who didn't talk, or who hid in the fire escape when people came, the diary taught me to talk. Now there is a man now called Ira Pogoff, who is giving workshops in what he calls the intensive journal. And he has elaborated really, as he said, whatever I did intuitively, he has elaborated into a system by which it can be taught. And the first thing he says, we're not here to write beautifully. We're here just to write down our dreams, to write dialogues with people we have never met and would like to talk to. We're here to write about our past, our future, and also particularly this feeling that no one needs to read it. And the diary has no name on it, it has only a number, if anyone should find it. So you can see that what lies at the basis of our whole really difficulties with expression are the taboos which we have set ourselves and which surround us and which are in the atmosphere. And it is those very taboos when I was trying to impart to others the love of writing, because it came for me as a life force, as a way of breathing, when I was in a situation in a sterile town or in a sterile place or in a trap, which sometimes women get themselves into trap by the personal life, by the duties. The diary was always the way of breathing, and I used to say that for me writing was breathing. Now I realized that it became more and more important because I was reading the other day this book called Future Shock, in which he speaks of the tremendous acceleration of our life, and that this has become our excuse for never looking inward and for not taking time for meditation or for examination or for attentiveness. Now this habit, which I acquired accidentally, as I told you, from a physical trauma, which became a guiding thing in my life, took on a different color after a while. It was not only the story of the adventure of coming to a new country, so that it became the diary of an adventure. It made me look at my life also at sorrowful moments, at moments of great disintegrating experiences, very much reminded me that it was an adventure, that it was a tale. Somehow the transference of whatever happened into writing gave it just that little bit of space which we needed in order to sustain the painful part of the experience. So there was always those two guiding things. One is the growth and watching the growth. And in watching my own growth, I was also, of course, it naturally follows that you look and observe the growth of others around you. So your attentiveness, your care for what is happening, your watchfulness, your meditation over what happens, your examination of what happens, the fact that you are observing others and that you are not only writing down your life, but that you're also naturally concerned with the growth of people around you, makes that a very, almost a necessary part of our existence. Because what we don't write down sometimes, if we don't follow a thought through or a feeling, is something which remains rather nebulous. And at this moment, particularly when women are trying really to find their identity, I found that the thing most lacking was this power of expression of what you feel in a certain situation, what you think and what you believe, which you want to impart to others and you can't. I would like to remove from everyone the feeling that writing is something that is only done by a few gifted people. I want to eliminate this instantly. I was not particularly gifted in any way. I wrote very bad novels when I was 20 years of age, and I presented Evanston Library with them so that the students could see how bad they were. Because when you choose a writer as a model, you're choosing their fine writing almost, particularly in my case, and you say, this I cannot do, or I can't reach, and you discourage yourself from the beginning. And I wanted students to see that at 20 I wrote perfect imitations of D.H. Lawrence. So it's very important, two things are very important, that you shouldn't think that someone who achieves fulfillment in writing and a certain art in writing is not necessarily a person with unusual gifts. I always said that it was an unusual stubbornness. Nothing prevented me from doing it every night after every day's happening. I had a need of two things, of preserving what was happening. And D.H. Lawrence said, as you know, he said that it's very difficult to transpose living experience into a novel without its dying in the process. And I felt that the period of wilting was very much as when you transplant a plant, that it was a matter of time, and I felt if I wrote quickly enough, it would still be alive. So I was catching up with the aliveness of what was happening. This makes you live in the present. It makes you be terribly, intensely aware of the present. And it also makes you intensely aware of others and seeing them and hearing them. And that is all that happened. So that people have said to me sometimes after reading the diary, I knew all these people, but I didn't know them as well. And this was purely a matter of intimacy. It was not a particular gift. My English at first was very awkward. A foreigner imitates and doesn't find his own style until much later. So I can't say to you, you know, it's only the people with unusual gifts who will write their life in an interesting way. It has nothing to do really with the literary accumulation of the work. What is important is that in the doing of it, I began to penetrate much deeper into the layers of consciousness and unconscious, because I registered everything. I registered intuitions, prophecies, looking into the future or looking back or re-examining the past. I always had a great mistrust of memory. And this, of course, came because when I read the early diaries, I saw that I really one does not remember, because you alter the facets of your experience with today's changes in you. So a you today looks at your childhood differently, and you really cannot recreate how you really felt when you were 9 years old. So I found out that memory betrays us, because memory changes with us and alters the images, but that the instant diary, which was written every day, does not betray us. Now, humorous things happen too. It was an incentive to make the life interesting, otherwise the diary would be dull. And we talk sometimes, there is a period there in the third diary when I say, oh, what is happening? I really haven't anything very interesting to say, and I must really, this is my fault, you see, this is my life to create. So this creation of expression is tied to creation of our life itself, of our friendships, of our loves, of our every kind of relationship, of our exploring of other countries. So instead of a camera, I took the diary to every place that I went to. I took it to Morocco. I took it in the buses in Japan. It was always there, and it was it became so spontaneous and so natural that it was really like a flow of interior monologue. But contrary to what people think about the diary, and our culture has had a rather suspicious attitude towards it, that it was narcissistic and self-involuted. And as I answered Leon Edel, who spoke of the narcissism, I said, I never saw a Narcissus pool that contained 1,000 characters. So this reflective mirror is actually a part of our spiritual life. And the more we live in a world which denies this, as the man who wrote The Future Shock really denies that and says that the students who are turning towards astrology, towards mysticism, towards the Orient, towards anything of the spirit, are dropping out of technology, I said, oh no, they're trying to find a source of strength and a center so that the technology doesn't enslave us and so that we are the captains of our own lives. So I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree that turning towards other things is really creating a self which can live then in the era in which we live. Now he lays great stress on what he calls the acceleration of our life, and he says that is ruining the possibility of contact, of friendships. Now I was able to disprove that this year, because I took an unusually heavy load of lectures. I couldn't say no, and I said yes, 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 and I thought I would go all over the country. And finally it became very quick, and I saw many people and they passed by, and yet, in spite of that, seeing thousands of people, I was able to select friends and make friendships in those few minutes of passing by a human being. So it isn't necessarily we need to be the victims of accelerated living or of transience or of moving away. It's a question of how deep the contact is when the contact is made. And I attribute to my diary this faculty for receiving others, for being prepared to receive the face, the voice, the presence, the words of others. It's a form of loving, it's a form of attentiveness, and when sometimes the students say to me, well, of course you knew so many famous people, I said, don't forget, they were not famous at all when we knew each other. We just were sitting next to each other and none of us had done anything. So we simply chose each other for genuine reasons, for potentials in each other. We were not finished writers, we were not famous writers. We were just like as students sitting next to each other, but we paid attention to the one who was sitting next to us. We didn't seek the famous writers in France. We simply encouraged each other and made our own group. So we learned to live with others and help others be creative and help others to achieve their work. We were very encouraging, very fraternal, and then of course, inevitably, everything I heard, I would put down. And then it's like those little Japanese flowers that you put in water. It would learn. I finally learned to let it come in full bloom. Instead of being hasty about the descriptions, I wanted to go deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, Ira Progoff speaks of this, and the only reason why he's teaching the intensive journal is only because he says that that is a method. For him, it was simply a way of going inside of this well, which is full of richness, and if you go deep enough, instead of remaining in a self-enclosed well, you strike, you see the water, the whole river or the whole ocean. So the collective unconscious, in a way, as you go deep into your own well, is where you communicate with all the waters of the world. So it begins with the contact with yourself, so that you exist, so that you find out your identity, which we all suffered so much from the loss of. Part of it was the cultural taboo on introspection, on meditation, on stopping the dynamism of life and action in order to reflect. So the two went together. You see, I led a very dynamic, very active life, but there was always a moment of meditation and reflection. There was always a moment of measuring the values of what I had learned or what I had acquired, or watching the new friend and watching the development of a friendship and telling the story of the relationship. So it has a marvelous quality which we can add to our lives, so that the day that we have the courage, then we reach a point where we have the courage to share, to express, to talk. And of course, we have to make a transition there, and the transition has to be an acceptance of pain and an acceptance of the fear. First, a recognition of the fear that prevents us from having intimate contact with others, with other races, with other countries, with different cultures and other expressions of life. But then after that, we have to realize that once we have overcome the fear, then there is also the overcoming of the fear of pain. That is, that you may be betrayed, you may be misunderstood, you may be attacked for saying what you think or presenting what you are. And I have told you even the last time how fearful I was when the diary was going to be published, that I dreamt that I opened the front door and then I was struck by mortal radiation. Instead of that, it was just the opposite. Suddenly I found I was not at all just a solitary diary writer. I was writing a diary for many women, and the diary of other women, and I said the diary of others. So that without knowing it, by going very deeply into the personal life, I had reached the other side and had gone beyond the personal to very basic emotional experiences which we all have really in common, but which by dint of writing every day, the only perfection, the only reason why I came to be able to say exactly what I felt was because, like a pianist, I wrote every day and wrote every day. And there was no more than that. There was no studying of writing, there was no literary discipline, there was only the reading and the receiving of experience and being open to experience. And I had to be open because I had to write it in the diary. So curiosity and interest and enthusiasm, all these things, which is what sustained the storytelling. The storytelling was also the healing thing, you see, at the same time. Because when you begin to see your life as a storyteller, and you become a storyteller, there is a healing process. So that then you're able to accept the painful and the terrifying parts of experience. So the diary has a great deal to give you. First of all, it makes you confront what you really feel and think, because no one is looking over your shoulder. Then somehow, day by day, this constant putting into words, which is very difficult to find words for feelings. It's very easy to find words for ideas. It's very easy to intellectualize and to have ideologies, but it's extremely difficult. And if you, at this point, do you have any questions to ask me? I would like this to be a conversation and not just a one-sided talk.
What do you say to people who say that writing is a lot of hard work? And it seems to me you've emphasized the joy of writing, almost therapeutic effect it has on you as a person coming to grips with the difficulties of life. And I was concerned with some of your writing, which you consider your better writing. When you were undergoing the process of writing, was this a particular warm, therapeutic time in your career, or was some of your better writing under more strenuous and working situations?
No, the only difference there was that when I was working on the diary, I had a sense that I was free, and that when I would sit down and say I'm starting a novel, I would be like so many of us, completely paralyzed by fear, by stage fright. So that is the only difference that I might say was painful. But after a while I resolved that, you see, by the novels nourishing the diary and the diary nourishing the novel. So to overcome the fear of the formal novel, which meant facing the world with a formal work, I would take characters sometimes out of the diary and start from that, based on a real character. And that would help me overcome this fear of starting the novel. And then I would go on. But every craft is difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that writing is easy, because every craft which becomes a skill, which you want to improve on, and I did want to improve the writing, because even at the age of 11, when I made my first description of arrival in New York, I said a few pages later, I must redo this again, I didn't tell it well enough. So there was a concern with telling it well, which you might say was already the beginning of the artist, concerned with expression. But the spontaneity of the diary helped me to be more spontaneous in the fiction work. And in other words, we never think of writing as being like piano playing, that it's by doing it and doing it and doing it that the skill comes. So that when you are ready to sit down, say, and write your story, your novel, you already have a nimbleness. You see, you've been living with words. I love discovering the meaning of words. I always pursued a new word, like a detective, until I knew what it was. Yes?
You talked about the capacity to look beyond the moment, the impact of a particular moment. But then you also spoke about immersing yourself in the present. I'm trying to get the connection between the two. Is it that by immersing yourself so thoroughly in the present that you gain some kind of, did you gain that capacity?
Yes, that you come out. But they happen, the two happen. You immerse yourself, but if you immerse yourself completely, while you are describing it, you come out the other end. See, so you achieve also the meditation about it. You're both inside because you're describing it when it's happened. So it's still warm and it's still lively in you. The two things happen. But then, as you work, it's like a painter who's painting his painting. Then he comes out at the other end, because then there is the distance when the painting is done, you see. When the description is done, then you are, again, as I call it, the storyteller.
Anais?
Yes.
Would you talk a bit about the process of not writing, at the point which you discovered that writing in the diary for you had become obsessional, and you decided to try not doing it for a while,
yes.
What that was like, and then what it was like to begin again, how you had changed and how your writing had changed?
Yes. The question is, will I talk a little bit about the time when I was writing obsessionally in the diary? Then, when Dr. Rank asked me to stop for a little while so that I wouldn't be, as he put it, possessed by the diary rather than possessing the diary. He thought that it had become compulsive, and he wanted me to feel simply free of it. And so he took it away from me. And I was very restless and very unhappy. I made comparisons with an opium smoker who is deprived of his opium, and I felt very badly. What he thought he was doing at the time was to push me out of the diary into writing fiction and being more imaginative and more creative and not remaining so much tied to the diary. You see, I was so comfortable with the diary, and it was so easy and so free that I was enjoying it. And I wasn't facing the real fiction writing, which he thought I should do. But what happened was that I did a very rather foxy thing, because he stopped the diary entirely, and I spent my time writing a portrait of him. And then I took the portrait to him, and he said, well, go on with the diary. But he did deliver me of the feeling of duty, you see, the sense of the obligation of writing or the obsession of writing, which he didn't want, and he was right about that. From then on, I was much freer to choose an event that I thought was worthwhile, and I got freer and freer with time. I didn't feel I had to record every day. So he was trying to do two things. He was trying to liberate my fictional self, because he felt that the writing of the daily thing was antithetical to creation. However, I didn't find it so. I used to find it a conflict, that keeping, like a journalist, a documentary day by day was preventing me from fictionalizing. But actually I found later on that they nourished each other, that the working at the fiction made me write better in the diary, but that writing the diary kept me much closer to emotional truth, to basic emotional truth. So I didn't want to be a realist in the sense of what we call realistic fiction, but I did take my fiction from reality, from emotional reality, and the two finally lived in harmony, I could say.
Earlier in your life, what role did letter writing fill for you? I know right now I'm feeling a lot of satisfaction from letter writing, and sometimes at the expense of other kinds of writing. How did that fit into your scheme of thought?
I was never a great letter writer. I guess I was being economical, and it all went into the diary. I'm answering letters now, but the correspondence was not a major part of my writing. Somehow, because I gave so much to the diary, I didn't have very much left for long correspondence. But Henry Miller was a tremendous letter writer, and people were always trying to separate him from letter writing, which he enjoyed, so that he would do his novels. So his friends were always saying, he wrote 40-page letters, 80-page letters. So, in a way, you may be doing something that you enjoy more than the formal work. But you might have to examine whether that love of letter writing doesn't conceal a writer too. Yes?
Two writers that you're very frequently associated with are D.H. Lawrence and Henry Miller. Do you feel that there's a discrepancy between your present encouragement of women to take an independent view and these writers' views?
You say, is there a discrepancy between my relationship to to male writers and especially those two? I don't see any contradiction in that. I think every experience comes at a time when that experience is what you're ready for. At the time that I was in Paris, there were no women artists or women writers that I could associate with, and I would have equally as with the men, because I've always had very lifelong friendships with women, but they were on another level. The wives of the artists and the women I met, and for instance, the one woman I did want to know, who was Juna Barnes, who had a great influence on my writing, didn't answer my letter. So there was not an accidental choice. It was the fact that the men were doing the writing, the painting, and whatever was happening around me, and that they were interesting to me. I never found at that time a female Artaud, or a female Miller, or a female Durrell. I would have been equally close to them. I used to read women all the time. But today, when women are coming forward, and I have women friends who are as strong and valuable painters as the men that I know, and as strong writers and as exceptional, then my friendship has been balanced between men and women. But I don't discriminate.
I'm curious if you had overcome the idea of writing something that would be a culmination of your work, because reading your diaries, it just keeps going. It doesn't seem to be building to crescendo, whereas I feel sometimes I'm waiting to write the thing that will, end everything.
I wrote a book about this called The Novel of the Future. I don't think that the build-up and the climax, and the resolution of the novel is really like our life. And the diary takes its form from life, which means it has its high moments and its low moments, and it goes on like this, but it doesn't necessarily come to any, why should it come to a peak, to a finality? You see, you're speaking of finality. And there is no finality actually in our life, because as you know, our relationships go on, and the friendships are renewed, and there's a continuity, and there is no climax, and there is no finality, except with death. So the diary taking its form from life will never have that. Each volume, in a way, does have its theme and its drama and its development, but it's not like the novel. Because we've learned from an artificial expectation from the novel that there are resolutions and things that are final and that we learn and we're finished with. And somebody was asking me, did I feel now completed, as a woman? I said, no, we never finish this self-creation.
Could you say more about fiction, like compared to diary?
Well, about fiction. Someone asked me to say something about fiction. The only thing I'd like to say about it is that we need both. We need the documentary. We need the psychological story. We need the knowledge of our life, daily life in a way. We need this inner journey, which the diary can accomplish. But we also need the fiction, because the fiction is the myth. And the one example I can give you where the diary has its limitations, and then the story takes over and tells you more, is the story of the rag pickers. In the diary, I describe the rag pickers who live on the outskirts of Paris as a journalist would. I say exactly what I saw, the shacks and the bags and the things laid out on the floor, and how they lived, and the children, and the broken down things and the objects, and then that's all I can say. I can say exactly what I saw. But in the diary, I can't go into what I saw later when I started to write the short story. I saw the metaphor. I saw that the rag pickers could be used as a metaphor for our wanting to throw out objects from the past, and then we can't get rid of them because the rag picker picks them up and brings them back again. And so we really can't throw out the past. So you see, the fiction can go into the myth, and we need both. We need the myth and we need the poem, and then we also need this human document from which, we get our contact with the self and with our inner life. Yes?
know whether the act of writing about an event in the diary changed you in a way that just experiencing the event without writing about it wouldn't do.
No, I think it depends on whether the writing is spontaneous, subconscious, already connected with the subconscious part of the life, and is not a self-conscious, intellectual, analytical process. There's a distinction. Now, when I analyze in the diaries because I'm confused, I'm lost, I'm troubled, and I'm in conflict, and then I try to analyze my way out of that. But when I describe an experience and immerse myself in it, let's say the description of Fez, Morocco, a city in which I felt immersed in, the writing is not an act of self-consciousness, provided your skill has gone into the subconscious and has become a part of you. It's as much a part of me as, say, somebody would sing after something happened. It's a natural, as I said, a natural way of being, of living.
Say something about rereading your diaries and what experiences you had. Say, I don't know how often you read the things that you wrote, or if you read back periodically.
The child diary I reread once, I told you, and then acquired this suspicion of memory as dependable. But later on, I didn't read anything until I came to edit it. And then I was very much surprised and very often very distressed by some of my opinions and some of my attitudes at the age of 20. Maybe that's why I didn't start at the age of 15. And there were things I wished I hadn't thought and I hadn't said, but then they were there and I had to accept them. So that is part of the confrontation with the self, with the changing self. It also makes you accept the fact that we do change and can change, and that certain, say, rigidities or certain inherited traits or certain things I had been taught, which the women, for instance, are struggling against, what I had been taught by my culture, my Latin culture and religion, were things that I was sorry that I didn't revolt against before. It bothered me to read when I was so submissive, say, to them. Yes?
Did you ever find in writing in your diary that sometimes it was easier to express yourself in another language, say in French or in Spanish, or rather than English? Or did you always write in English?
Well, no, the early diaries are in French, and I only began English at 16. The question was, did I sometimes find easier to express myself in another language? Why do you? Do you write better in some other language?
Well, occasionally I think some things, thoughts or feelings are better expressed, say, embodied more.
No, I must say, I didn't ever go back to French or Spanish, but I really had a love affair with the English language from the first time I began to study it. I loved the language. I found that language was sufficient and very rich and just right for what I wanted to do. And so I never did go back. In fact, I can't write anymore in French or in Spanish. So there was really an adaptation and adoption of English as a permanent language. And they say when you begin to dream in a language, that means that you really have become American, and I dream in English. Yes?
Yes. You had mentioned several ways to question yourself to get to the process of writing. Other than the questions, could you talk a little bit about the problems you had, which are problems I'm facing now with energy blocks, which seem to hamper the creative expression and flow, and if you did some therapy working on releasing that.
Yes, the energy, I think, is tied to the conflicts. I think it's directly related to the conflicts. And that's why when I always say, in the 20s, when we do put things as opposites and choices and selections, if we go this way, we can't go that way. And in my 30s too, when the conflicts were exhausting me, I had less energy than I have now when I'm in harmony with myself and have accepted whatever it is that I am. So there, I think, is where therapy does help. Because there is also an extra problem that women have about writing. They have some that men don't have, and that is a guilt. Now, Otto Rank has written remarkable things about that. We have guilt for not creating, and we have guilt for creating. because somehow in woman the association of the active act of creating, the creative will, was a masculine concept. And women have had either the fear that this activity was an aggressive thing, and I was cut off once by a semantist saying, you don't mean aggressive, you mean active. Aggressive is aggressing upon. But women have had a certain cultural training which gave them guilt for creating, because culture didn't demand of women achievement, it demanded it of the man. So the man had no guilt, say, for locking himself up and writing a novel and not even paying attention to his family for 3 months. But women had been almost inbred in the sense of that the personal life was the first major duty, and that the writing had to do with the self-expression, and she confused that with subjectivity and narcissism, whereas we never spoke of a male writer, as a narcissist. So you see, woman has a rather much more complex reason for handicaps in writing and for stops and for blocks that may have to do with all of those things. It has to do with social taboos, it has something to do with religious taboos, it has also with the self-assertion. I used to think that some terrible things would happen if I ever overshadowed my father, who was a musician, or my brother, who was a musician. I mean, I really feared that would somehow do them harm. Now, I don't know if many women have that feeling or not, but the feeling that if you grow, you are taking some sunlight from the tree next to you. I must have thought I was growing into a redwood giant tree, because I had such a fear of growth, that my growth would impede. Now, Rank writes about that in a book called Truth and Reality, which I think is just being reprinted. He speaks of the cultural guilt that we were given for self-assertion, because what we demanded of the man, which delivered him from guilt, was this achievement, and we never demanded that of woman. Yes.
I would like to hear you discuss some of the more practical aspects of plotting, planning, and structuring your novels. How into your process you go through.
Now, in this realm, I may seem to you not very concrete, because from the very beginning, I'm afraid, because I didn't have any schooling, and I left school very early, and I was self-taught, and I read a great deal, I disposed of that by saying always that I was born modern, and I didn't know the discipline of the novel. I never learned what we learn about the form of the novel. I never learned about the form of anything. So I went my own way. My own way happened to be on the poetic level. So the novels would begin always the way a poem starts for you. One line, which is an image. And so I didn't even know where I was going from there. My only concrete route for the novel was, say, a character that I knew, someone usually from the diary, which would then in the process of fiction, of course, become composite and would change and would no longer be the person I started with. But what I meant is that I chose themes, as you do in music, rather than plot. And that the plot didn't seem to me lifelike. And this may have been because the diary showed me this constant oscillation of our feelings, this constant change, this constant fluidity, this constant relativity, you see, so that I couldn't possibly believe that there would be a regular progression in the character which would lead to a climax of a novel. I found the novel highly artificial. So then I began to compose a novel the way you do a poem. That is, I had a theme, say in Children of the Albatross was adolescence, or in The Four-Chambered Heart was the life on the river and the whole desire to float and escape from the contingencies in the daily life. Each book had a theme which I then would work out like a musical theme with variations and repetitions and certain poetic passages. So you see, I can't really talk about the novel. I can only talk about the kind of poetic novel which I wrote, which was very traditional in France, and was only done, as far as I know, in 1925 by Juno Barnes in Nightwood, which is a classic. Nightwood was that kind of poetic novel, if you want, which really doesn't have the form of the novel, but it has movements, as you might say, in a piece of music.
You talked about one of the greatest barriers to communication being a fear of vulnerability, and I wondered how you overcame this yourself. Was it a particular experience, a particular set of experiences, or was it just a natural culmination of maturity?
Well, that was a lifelong process. And I remember being asked by Dr. Allenby one day, I said, I'm always the listener, I'm always the one that the Millers confess all their dramas to. And he says, and how do you feel about the people who confess to you? I said, it makes me love them. He says, well then why should you think that if you do the same thing, you won't be loved? I never thought of that. See, those who confess to me, which at that time, as I said to you, I was the listener and I was quiet and people talked to me, I betrayed my own fear. You see, I couldn't do what they did, and yet I loved them more because the more I knew them, the more I loved them, because the more you know a person, the more you understand their motivation and you don't judge. But I didn't expect that to be done to me. I didn't really believe it, so it was a lifelong process of trust. I had to learn that same trust. Yes?
Your writing seems very dreamlike to me. Is that your vision of reality? Do you see reality as still a dream?
Wait. No, my writing is not dreamlike. It is that in life, part of our life is dreamed. And I have welded those two so that, they are unified, and they go together. That is, we do have the moments of concrete reality, and then we have always this accompaniment of our fantasy, and then there is the night dreaming, and then there's the day reverie, and writing itself is a form of what I call waking dream. So it seems dreamlike, but it's not a dream. It's actually the way we live, because we live partly half conscious and half unconscious. And we are accompanied by our fantasies, and the night dreams do influence us, and our life during the day influences our night dreams. So it's merely a marriage of them.
This is a subjective question, but maybe other people have this problem. If I carry a camera or a diary with me, a journal, as you said, on the buses in Japan, I tend to get a very narrow view of things because I either wonder how they're going to look through a frame or how they're going to sound when they're written down, and I lose the large experience. Does this come just with doing it more and more and more so that you're not so conscious and you can experience it in a greater way and not color it into how it's going to sound?
I think after a while, I started at the age of 11. So by the time I was a full-fledged writer, writing and me were completely unified. It was such a spontaneous act that there wasn't that separation or the self-consciousness. It became a second, automatic writing. It was as natural as sitting down and remembering what you had been doing, I think that's a matter of simply of continuing association with the writing, so that the contact with the writing is so intimate that it's like breathing, it's part of you. As the camera has become sometimes for camera photographers, the camera is almost a part of his body. There will come a time when you can unify them. So I think we'll say good night.